In this one, I'm just gonna cover. Some people would say that Kanye West came out and made some outlandish statements, but to me, I want to give people some history on the environment in America prior to the 13th Amendment and how I believe, and I actually have a presentation on it called Policing Blacks. But I believe that the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, that was passed with no black intervention. Like black, I don't have the records to show that black people were in these meetings and say, okay, I agree to the 13th Amendment. I love those terms. I love the terms of the 14th Amendment. Let's see if it ever happened. But in this one, let's see if you ever find it. But in this one, I'm gonna talk about the Seminoles and how they actually. You always hear about these revolutions that took place in the United States. Like let's say Nat Turner. Nat Turner, he, the way that his so-called rebellion went, it didn't really last long because it got put down fast. If you follow the story of Nat Turner. But if we talking about the Seminoles, we talking about a group of people who was going to plantations, raiding them, and this was between 1812. The War of 1812 was still a part of the same people. We can even go before that, but from 1812 to 1858, as far as we know it, up into the Civil War. But I can prove that these people warred against slavery and had a successful rebellion, but you don't hear about it. But this is General Thomas Jessup, Sidney Jessup. Thomas Sidney Jessup, he was basically the head general in Florida at the time. But it says General Thomas Sidney Jessup, upon assuming command in Florida, writing active Secretary of War Benjamin Butler with his assessment of the war. This is the so-called Seminole Wars. He says, this you may be assured is a Negro, not an Indian war. And if it's not speedily put down, the South will feel the effects of it on their slave populations before the end of the next season. So they said it is not, if they don't hurry up and put this down, the South gonna feel it. What are they gonna feel? These people who history has labeled Seminoles, I can prove that the name could apply to them before we get the term runaway, but nonetheless, they give the origin of the name Seminole to runaway. So these black brothers who somehow have been wrote out of the tribe as freedmen, meaning they were somehow slaves or freed by the United States to be in this tribe. But it said if we don't put this down, these people who coming up and running up on our plantations, we gonna feel it. We ain't gonna have nothing. So this is the environment leading up to the 13th Amendment and the Civil War. All of this is still taking place. These black people didn't just disappear. The effects on us that the South would have felt, it didn't just disappear because the Civil War started. He go on to say the two races, the Negro and the Indian, are rapidly approximating. They are identified in interests and feelings. Should the Indians remain in this territory, the Negroes amongst them will form a rallying point for runaway Negroes from the adjacent states. So he's saying basically what they said in the early Carolina history, we must put a aversion between these people. We got to get the so-called red man to agree to leaving so we can have our way on these so-called black people, the Negroes, because it's two races. It's the Negroes and it's the Indian, according to these people. These people was in Florida going up, the same people in Florida going up to these plantations, freeing their people and burning them down. They said it's going to be a rallying point. So Florida was on its way to becoming a free black state, as we had covered, though. They know what time it is in Florida. And this is Thomas Sidney Jessup. He was famously quoted as having declared about the Seminoles that the country can be rid of them only by exterminating them. So the only way that we could get rid of the Seminoles is commit genocide, extermination. That's on record that he said that the only way we can get rid of them is through extermination. Many slaves have escaped to join the Indians and furnished them with many important information. And if strong measures are not taken to restrain our slaves, there is but little doubt that we should soon be assailed with a servile as well as an Indian war. This was a letter to the Secretary of War. So they're saying if we don't stop this from going on, we're gonna have basically a slave war, which they're calling a servile, as well as the Indian war. So they said that the blacks at this point, because he's saying as well as the Indians, so it's the serviles is a black. He said if we don't stop this, we're gonna have a black war on our hands. This is the environment before the 13th and 14th Amendment. This is what black people was doing before the Civil War. They didn't have no need for that. White people were fighting against each other in the Civil War. That was something that white people was doing. Black people was focusing on freeing themselves. I'm gonna throw some images in between. But it says Thomas Sidney Jessup admired the Seminoles as adversaries. We have at no former period in our history had to contend with so formidable an enemy. No Seminole proves false to his country, nor has a single instance occurred of a first-rate warrior having surrendered. So this dude said we have at no former period in our history, talking as a white American, he's saying in our white American history, we have not fought an adversary like the Seminoles. So you went up against the British. The British wasn't an adversary against you like the Seminoles. You went up against other Native American tribes. You went up against the Barbary pirates before you signed peace treaties with them. So they said at no point have we faced somebody like the Seminoles because these people was warned. You wasn't sending a militia after these people. This is military versus the Seminoles. This is the War Department talking about this. It's not the state government saying, oh, okay, we got to get some extra people. Let's form a militia. They were sending armed troops to go get these people. The Negroes ruled the Indians, and it is important that they should feel themselves secure. If they should become alarmed and hold out, the war will be renewed. This is what Jessup said to the Secretary of War. Pond said at this time. And he's changing the way that he's handling it because he sees that there's no end between the Seminoles and the U.S. So he went from a war of extermination, which he couldn't do, because that's what the Seminole Wars was, all the way through Andrew Jackson, who started all of this. The same person who passed the Indian removal because of Florida. So this is all of the stuff that's going on at this time. So he said the Negroes ruled the Indians, but they'll try to tell you that you was an outsider in the tribe. Why in the world is the outsider in the tribe ruling? Why is he holding in negotiations? So in order for them to end the war with the Seminoles, they saying that the Negroes must feel secure. If they feel alarmed, the war gonna keep going because it's not about the Seminoles, or as they calling them the Seminoles or the Indians in this situation. It's the Negroes. So we got to get to a point where I don't really have to keep going back and forth between what the Negroes and the Seminoles is. The Indians is the people who are the red people who they're trying to make the face of the tribe when it's clearly the Negroes, because Seminole means maroon, which means runaway. You can go to Yet Simile, which means free people, but that still doesn't go back to the red people. It's what the Muskegans call these people. But this is the first time in the U.S. where you will find this language. So through the Seminole War, we get to this part. This is 1838 to 1839. It reads that all Negroes, they calling them the property of the Seminoles, who deliver themselves up to the commanding officer of the troops, shall be free. They went from trying to re-enslave these people, taking them across international lines from Spanish Florida to the U.S. before they gained control of Florida and really drove us out. But he said anybody who hand over and stop warring against us, basically you free. It don't say you're free with stipulations. It is not present in its Declaration of Freedom, which predates the U.S. attempt by almost 30 years. The U.S. attempt with the so-called African American, this group of so-called people who were just let out of slavery. Don't matter if they was free people of color, don't matter if they was freedmen. Everybody from now on comes into the banner of the 13th Amendment. But what does freedom actually mean? When the Seminoles was free, the Seminoles didn't say, okay, man, let me go vote in this election. He didn't say that. He didn't say, okay, let me go over here and see if I can go work for this guy. He didn't say that either. He didn't even say, let me go over here and see how they are depicting me. See what they talking about me. They didn't care about that. They cared about building up their own community and infrastructure. That's what the freedom was. They had self-autonomy. It wasn't the freedom to go and do the stuff that they trying to force our people into, a consumer status. That's not what we was here. That's not what the freedom that our ancestors fought for or got. People say, man, your ancestors died to vote. I say, okay, let's look at the Seminoles. What did my ancestors die in that situation for? Because you can pick and choose to try to put stuff on your ancestors. Everybody could be right, but you can't make people feel bad for the path they taking when you can prove your ancestors tried to take the same path. But they said that all Negroes who give themselves up, this is in 1838, will have freedom, shall be free. This is in 1838 again. We come back to the 13th Amendment, which is what this is about. So we showed that black people warred with the United States and gained their own freedom through self-liberation. They wasn't waiting for white people to feel sorry. They was not only free and content with being free, but they was going back to get other brothers and stuff. This is where the Underground Railroad went into Florida. The earliest Underground Railroad was brothers running into Florida. You had the Stono Rebellion, which was also squashed, but they was trying to make it to Florida to join the rebellion as well, because people know what time it was in Florida. So these people fought and gained freedom. So now after the Civil War, where white people then fought over who has the ownership of this property called the African American, you had one white saying, okay, the states own the African American, and you had the second white group saying, no, the federal government owns the African American. It's our property. We're confiscating this property. When we were freed, Abraham Lincoln, and I covered this in Police and Black, and I covered in my Juneteenth presentation as well. But he says he countermanded him, returning blacks as property in the ownership and protection of the federal government. That's how black people came into the Union lines as confiscated property from the South. Confiscated was contraband. You could confiscate contraband, anything that was used, that the South used basically to get a leg up. They could confiscate it, whether it's land, weapons, anything, and it included the slaves. So they confiscated the slaves, which lets you know that means they were property. So let's just get into the 13th Amendment. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So it said neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except. So how come when we go back into a doctrine that's that's 30 years older than this, it don't have a stipulation that says, okay, we won't mess with you unless you break our laws. It don't say that. Why didn't the language continue with this statement? Because they're letting you know that you're still property. The Seminoles fought for actual freedom. They wasn't property no more. So that's why the meetings with them was treaty based. You put this on the record, you talking to me. You talking to a black Seminoles, you put that on the record, you talking to the black Seminoles. When you go to the 13th and 14th Amendment, that's for anybody. Anybody fit those categories. White people who rebelled against the United States in the 14th Amendment, that's how they got their citizenship to come back into the United States. They was born here, so they were subject to the jurisdiction. So when we going to look at the 13th Amendment, it didn't do nothing but certify that we were still property of the U.S. because they still have control over our life. How can you say that we can enslave you or force you into servitude if you commit a crime? Like, where's the crime at? So you telling me that you kidnapped me, you pulled me over here, and now I don't have no type of self-autonomy with my people? You telling me that now you're the one that's still making the rules for me? The person who enslaved me? Abraham Lincoln on record saying that he didn't care if the slaves were free or stayed slaves. He only cared about preserving the Union. That's all he cared about. But the origin of this type of language comes from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. What you had was the European taking new territories, and they was trying to set up an institution about not having slavery in the territory. But they did say that if you had a slave, he can come into this territory as indentured servant. But let's go into to the language of this. This is Article 6 of the Northwest Ordinance. It says, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory, otherwise than in a punishment of crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. It's the same exact language. provided always that any person escaping into the same from whose labor or service is lawfully claimed in any one of the original states, such as a fugitive, may be lawfully reclaimed and conveyed to the person claiming his or her labor or service, basically as foresaid. So they said basically the Fugitive Slave Act is in effect. So if somebody come over here claiming that you're a slave, they can come up in here and run you up out of this Northwestern Territory, according to the Northwest Ordinance. And we're not going to have slavery nor involuntary servitude unless it's a punishment for a crime. So they saying that they can re-enslave you if you commit a crime on some stuff that they cooked up on the books. So that based off of their laws, not on your self-autonomy that your ancestors been had on this land, not the self-autonomy that the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People say that you can have, not even the Constitution, which don't even include the Native Americans, because it say Indians not taxed. It lets you know that these are separate a group of people. But they saying the laws that we got, that's major. So when you hear Kanye saying that the 14th, and when he elaborated, when you heard him say that the 14th Amendment should be abolished, I'm saying the 13th Amendment, I'm saying the 13th and the 14th Amendment should be abolished, and black people should draw up the concept of our interaction with the United States, and then we run from there. Because the relationship that we have now, they're preying on us. They're preying on us, and we're not even moving up, because it seems like every time somebody get a movement, it takes the momentum from black people movements. You're not getting a leg up if you get to the first step, and all of a sudden you just helping people get to the next step, helping people get to the next step. When you still on the first step, and all your ancestors ain't nothing but on the step before you, yeah, you can go to work, but you still in the same system. You can go home and enjoy yourself. You still in the same system, though. What wealth are we acquiring as African Americans? Well, we can say, man, we got something to leave to our kids that's not this system. Because that same system, according to their system, if they are convicted of a crime, they could be enslaved. That's their law. They got a law that say that you can be enslaved for committing crimes. And then what's the trip about it? When you're going into the convict leasing systems or the laws where, man, I wish I'm gonna have to put I'm gonna put it in here. But what you find is they had laws where they said if they thought you was being lazy and wasn't working, they could put you back into a slave. Is that being convicted of a crime? Of course it is, because they changed the laws to make it a crime where you gotta come work for us. They had you on sharecropping where you was handing a percentage, or you was getting a percentage. Then they had you on the convict leasing systems. It's a trap, family. So when you got the 13th and 14th Amendment, where they try to offer, and the 14th Amendment is another one that came after the Treaty of 1866, which gave blacks indigenous a status that was in the country at the time of the rebellion. It says it in the Treaty of 1866. It says freedmen and free people of color. We got our indigenous citizenship statuses, or whatever you want to call it, before we got U.S. citizenship status in the 14th Amendment in 1868, compared to when you got this language of the 1865 13th Amendment talking about you can be enslaved, that's based off of the Northwest Ordinance. Then you come back to 1838 with the Seminoles, and they say all the Negroes, who they calling property of the Seminoles, who deliver themselves up into the commanding officer of the said troops, should be free. The first Jessup Proclamation. But hey, I know it's easy to bash on Kanye, because people like, man, if he abolished the 13th Amendment, that means they're gonna re-enslave black people. I never think that little, because I don't think the man got power to try to re-enslave me again. I'm not that mentally weak, but it's a